Salutations, everypup, and welcome to Chapter 23 of Sorry, Wrong Number by ShizunaRey. As always, the link to the fic will be in the description below. And with that out of the way, let's jump on into it. Chapter 23, A Semblance of Truth. Author's Notes. I finally figured out where to take this story! And it only took me about 3 years. Cry. Movies always made faking an identity and sneaking onto a flight seem more difficult than it actually was. But when Tony Stark puts a national manhunt on your ass, yeah, getting from Cairo to America suddenly becomes a lot harder. Jake strode through the airport gate, silently praying that the stubble and mustache combo he'd grown for the past month did enough to sell his new identity. He moved carefully through the airport security, keeping his pace steady and his eyes on potential escape routes. Only when he was seated and the plane was in the air did he finally let himself react. New York, aquí vamos. Peter was chewing his lip again, a nervous habit he's pretty sure he picked up from Ned. He stole another glance at his phone, only to sigh and pocket it once more. Moon Knight was late. And the rooftop he sat on was way too damn cold for his spidey suit. Peter exhaled sharply, rubbing his gloved hands together in a vain attempt to generate warmth. He was starting to wonder if Moon Knight was even going to show when a gust of wind swept over the rooftop, and Peter's instincts flared just a second before a figure landed silently behind him. Nice of you to finally show, Peter muttered without turning around. You know, you knocked me out on a rooftop. This is a pretty traumatic moment for me. Moon Knight stepped forward, his white crescent cape shifting like liquid under the dim light. I had to be sure you were alone. His voice was calm and steady, and he completely ignored Peter's attempt at a joke. Peter turned to face him with his arms crossed. Well, here I am, freezing my ass off. What's so important you could just text me like a normal, weird, morally questionable vigilante? Moon Knight ignored the jab. I need your help. I figured... The jackals, Moon Knight simply continued. Peter frowned. The Avengers have been dealing with them for weeks without you. What, and you want to help now? You're not the only one who have been having problems with them. I think you forgot who informed the Avengers why I left in the first place. Mark said with a grim look, obscured by his mask. The Spider Kid seemed to pick up on it anyways, though. Dude, chill, I get it. You gotta know why I'm at least a little pissed at you, though, right? Moon Knight stilled, as if listening to something, and then let out a resigned sigh. I'm sorry for knocking you out and leaving you on a roof. That was uncalled for. Damn right it was! Alright, let's meet the team. Just like that? Mark asked in surprise. Spider-Man echoed the question right back at him. Yup, just like that. The three altars were filled with an odd mix of dread and deja vu as they sat on the very couch that the Black Widow and Hawkeye had cross-interviewed him once before. The Avengers, more like Roger, Stark, and the Kid, sat opposite him. Fun times. So you want to work with us? The captain interrupted Stark, who had been holding what could only be called a villain monologue since Mark had stepped through the door. Tony shot the super soldier a scandalized look, but thankfully kept his mouth shut. Between Jake screaming at the man from a nearby window and the Spider Kid desperately trying and failing to stop Stark, it had become quite difficult to listen to either of the three. I feel like I could be of use, Mark answered. Concho has agreed to it as well. And again he goes with this imaginary mind-controlling and, mind you, supposedly dead god. Wendy, you really gotta... They're not imaginary, Stark. Heed your words, for you don't know the power behind them. Mark could hear Stephen and Jake laugh at him. Mate, what just came out of your mouth? He bit back a retort to Stephen's mocking, and instead continued to stare at Stark's dumbfounded face. I'm just gonna ignore what you said and choose not to feed into your delusions. You know, I really thought that the wind show that Conchu put up last time you were so ignorant was enough to prove my god's existence. Stark snorted out a laugh. I'm still on proving that was all you, Mr. Spectre Grant Lockley. You know, guys, I think we're skipping over this work for hire, screwed identity thing too much. We've talked about this, Tony, Steve interjected. He turned his gaze back to Mark and asked once again, You're here to work with us? Yes, Mark answered this time. I've been dealing with the jackals in Cairo, and if they're there, they could be anywhere, and as much as Conchu and I would like for me to take care of them on my own, I'm just one man. Sounds fair enough to me. Let's brief the attacks. Stark scoffed, but pulled out a hologram nonetheless. Mark could feel Stephen's curious impression, but he could only think about how impractical it must be to carry that disc around at all times. It was bad enough to remember where his car keys were, but in Stark's defense, Jake loved to hide them. He was very adamant about being the best and only driver in the body. We've been attacked about 13 times since your departure. Our current strategy is to throw paint bombs, invented by yours truly, at them. Only way they are visible. Costs a lot and is a nightmare to clean up afterwards. You got a more efficient strategy, Mooney? Mark sighed and pinched his nose bridge. I think I'm gonna have to clarify some things first. And without. He shot a scathing look at Stark. Any interruptions. Tony held his hands up in mock surrender, and Spider Man nodded eagerly. I may have not been entirely truthful about my past. You know, I was a U.S. Marine Corps. Even dabbled a bit with the CIA before I was a mercenary. Not that it matters. When I was discharged from the military, I went work for hire for my old CO, Bushman. He let out a bitter chuckle. I was on a mission in Egypt a few years back. The mission was to raid a dig site. Bushman changed the plan and called for no witnesses. Mark looked up at the three Avengers. It wasn't right. I tried to get them all away, but we didn't make it. I mean, you've seen the report. You were very adamant about shoving it in my face. I apologize, but at the time, Captain America tried to interrupt, but Mark just continued on. He stared at the floor, his hands clasped tightly in front of him, as if letting go would make everything spill out too fast. I was just about bleeding out and dragged myself towards the tomb that was located near the dig site, Mark said quietly. Didn't even know what it was at the time. Just saw a structure, any structure, and thought I could crawl into it and either die somewhere quietly or hide well enough until someone found me. I wasn't looking for salvation. I wasn't hoping for some god to reach down and spare me, but Khonshu did. They spoke to me that day, and I was desperate and bleeding, and they were an asshole but convincing, so. Tony didn't even wait a beat. Then why the hell did Concha choose you? You think you were just supposed to believe an Egyptian god randomly picked some half-dead mercenary crawling into a tomb to bleed out? I don't know, Stark. I don't have an explanation for everything. Ho ho, the man laughed. I think you do. Mark's eyes flared. You want to know why he chose me? He stood abruptly, the scrape of the couch being pushed backward loud in the room. Because I was at my lowest! Because I had nothing left! That's why! Tony tensed, but said nothing, watching him like he was trying to take apart a puzzle with no clear edges. Mark went on, voice rising with every word. There just was something about Stark that made him unable to stop. They didn't save me! They used me! I wasn't some hero built myself a suit in a cave. I was a shell. That's what made me perfect for them. Someone with no reason to say no. I was there to die. I'd already failed everyone else. The last thing I thought I had control over was the gun under my chin! The kid was the first to speak after Mark's outburst. He could imagine that his face was stricken behind the mask, his voice barely above a whisper. You were gonna... Mark didn't look at him, just nodded. Yeah, I was done. And Kachu, they didn't stop me because I was worth saving. They stopped me because I was convenient. Because I was broken enough to rebuild however they wanted. Steve's expression softened with understanding, but Mark wasn't finished. You think I wear that suit because I believe in some grand crusade? No, I wear it because it's penance. Because every night I wonder if it would have been better to just bleed out in that tomb. At least then, it would have been my choice. Tony exhaled sharply, pacing a step away. Damn. A silence followed. No one quite knew what to say until the Spider Kid finally spoke quietly. You're still here. That's gotta mean something. Mark glanced at him and muttered, I guess it does, before sighing. I'm going out for a smoke. alone, and turning around to walk out the door. Author's notes. Ooh, getting in the feels! And that's a wrap on chapter 23. I hope you all enjoyed. That was actually quite fun to read, even though I fail at voicing every single character in this fic every single time. It's whatever. I hope you enjoyed. I can't stick to one voice for Mark for the life of me, so whatever. Please go show the original author ShizunaRey some love, and please leave me a comment. I love reading comments. They make me so happy. Please leave me specifically hate comments, and I'll shout out in the next video. Sadly, no one left a comment on last video, so I guess I'll go crawl in a hole and cry. Anyway, I hope you all enjoy. See you next time. Bye-bye, pups!